All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into this version of my fireside chat. Today, I have a very special guest. Chris, I've been looking forward to this for weeks, as you know.
Likewise.
Chris DuCousso, has a very special place in my heart. I'm going to try to do a little bit of his background justice, but Chris actually started on the sales side. So where I sat was at places like IBM, had a bunch of success there, and then got enlisted into companies, large companies in the UK, like the BBC, where he, I think, commanded a 200 million pound transformation, right, to their Siemens stack, and did so, by liaising with multiple business executives. You can imagine just the scale of that company. And then he and I actually intersected when he was at News Corp, leading their procurement division. And Chris, I think I've told you this in many ways, but that was such a critical time in my career, and I learned so much from you. There's a reason why.
Well, thank you.
I think we're in touch today, and it wasn't in the way that you just gave in to everything I asked for. It was that we actually had some very, very tough situations. I think trying to align 15 business units across 30,000 global units, and it was very much a give and take relationship. And I learned a lot about how to do sales, believe it or not, from you, more so even than a lot of the folks that I worked with and a lot of the training that I got in sales. So very excited to dive into this general topic of sales and kind of what makes great salespeople. But Chris, did I miss anything? Is that good?
Yeah,
Should
that's
I be a
fine.
publicity
Yeah, I mean
director?
that's more than generous enough. Yeah, you were fine with that. Yeah, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here and see you again after a quite a large intervening period.
Yes.
And I'm very pleased to be doing this. We can learn some stuff from each other, hopefully, and hopefully we can impart some of that knowledge that we've gained over the years to other folks to help them on their sort of sales journey with their businesses. So thank you for having me here.
Of course. Thank you, Chris. Well, let's start with kind of a little bit of your journey first, and then we can dive into sales as a concept. But what was the initial reason for getting into sales? And then subsequently, what made you shift into kind of the procurement world? Let's just start there.
Yeah, so I've had a varied career. So I've worked across finance, technology, financial sales, technology sales, service management, a whole host of different roles. So I sort of started as a project manager in the early days. Actually, the BBC relationship with me goes back many years. I think one of my first major IT roles was in the BBC in the mid-90s. And sort of kept a relationship with them over the years. And I think where it probably started from was in delivering solutions to organizations. I ended up being asked to solve and broker and resolve disputes for organizations. And I think that transition sort of came at the BBC. So I went into the BBC to help them deliver and manage a major outsourcing event that they were having with what was at that point in time called television technology, I think it was called. And that was being sold and outsourced to Siemens, or picking that up as part of a big strategic outsource. And I was actually working for that IT function at the BBC at the time. And from delivering services, I was asked if I would start looking at, well, can you manage that transition, and can you help us manage the relationship with Siemens, who were then taking over the BBC technology function. And that's kind of how it started. And I spent a good few years there managing. It was a big contract. It was 1.5 billion pound contract. I mean, it was over 10 years, but $1.5 billion pound contract. So at that time, when the exchange rate was sort of normal, I mean, that would have been a sort of $3 billion contract. It's not that. I mean, it's big-ish. I mean, obviously, if you go to the oil companies like BP, they spend that a year. But for a broadcasting organization,
that is massive. Because remember, some of the startups I'm talking to, we're talking about $1 million contracts being big. So that's massive. Yeah, don't undersell yourself there.
So that's kind of started, and then that kind of stuck. And I ended up working with a number of people who were delivering projects. I ended up solving commercial issues for organizations, and some of the executive and leadership at the BBC. And those folks moved on, and that's how I ended up actually up at News Corp. It was someone I'd worked with at the British Broadcasting Corporation, had a technical challenge, had a commercial challenge with a technical implementation as part of Newsroom 360. So that was part of their modernization of the newsroom content production process. And they asked me to go there and do something. And I was working for both. I was doing some stuff for the BBC and I was doing some stuff for News Corp. And then that sort of caught on in that sort of, it was more a commercial role, if you like. I wasn't really procurement. I was in my role there was a consultant, but it was commercial consultant technology. And that's what I was kind of dealing with, was really putting together the commercials, making those deals work, managing those third-party relationships. There's a fair bit of professional services that was going on as well. So they wanted someone to validate, review, critique, and structure those agreements so they got the outcomes that they were looking for. And then that kind of stuck and ended up spending a long time at News Corp. It morphed in. I then got involved in the publishing split from entertainment. So I led the technology review to look at our current operating models across the group, and I then set about with our CTO the target operating models. And then with that, I picked up the role for putting together all the cloud-first relationships to implement and affect that cloud transformation, which was part of that the publishing division's strategy under Paul Cheeseborough.
Makes sense.
That's kind of part. And that was a fairly big set of programs. We went from 0 shared services to around $500 million of contracts under management worldwide. So we consolidated a lot of those agreements. We rationalized all our platform strategies. So we consolidated around, for example, Salesforce. We've got a lot of different point solutions. So we consolidated around Salesforce. There were lots of different strategies, lots of different agreements across the country. We brought all of those together. And we saved hundreds of millions of dollars of operating costs as part of that. And also particularly improved efficiency across the organization. So things like time to market improved, data access improved, because now everyone was on common platforms. So from a big data perspective, we were able to look at data centrally at the News Corp level from all of our different business units. So there were some big strategic advantages in bringing that together, quite apart from sort of just basic cost saving.
Yeah, it was quite an innovative group, because Dropbox at the time was not seen as an enterprise product, right? So I think there's a strategic bet. We worked together in the context of Slack too. So we were lucky enough to work together in a couple of different scenarios. I guess these are like large transformations. You were probably engaging with so many different stakeholders. Like, what do you think made you the person to do this, right? Because you have so many skill sets. I can talk about them, but I want to hear from your perspective. First party, like, what is it that you think kind of made you really stand out to be the guy helping to be the glue and the person really making sure you're liaising with multiple departments? Like, how did that play out for you, and what do you think it was? What was your secret sauce?
I think it's been one of the things that you face in organizations is what's the most expeditious way of solving any particular problem, right? Be it a commercial problem, be it a technology-based problem, be it a people problem. And what I found over the years of working is most issues, probably 80% of them, the underlying cause is people, right? It's not, or decisions that were made by people, rather than actually we've got a technological impasse, we've got a commercial impasse, the numbers don't work. It's normally a people-based thing. And actually, very early on, many years ago, I had a relationship with someone who worked in the area of organizational psychology, and I got exposed to the whole Challenger disaster piece. And so if you look at that, yes, if you've ever studied that, the primary reason that was given officially was it was a technical failure, but actually behind that,
the Challenger, the shuttle. We're saying the space shuttle.
Right, yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I thought you were talking about Challenger sales, which we could also talk about.
No, I'm talking about Challenger disaster. Yeah. So large part of that. So that came down to an O-ring failure in a I think a fuel leak, to be fair, but it was it was quite a long time ago. So I'm trying to recollect how that panned out. But the primary issue there was executive decisions that were taken basically for time and cost control reasons, right? It wasn't a technical issue at all. These were decisions. This was an event that was precipitated by the decisions that led up to it. So it's a people-based issue at the end of the day. Even though, prima facie, you might look at that and think there's a technical issue. We need to redevelop this O-ring and come up with a better solution. But that's partly true. But the issue was no, right? It didn't have to happen. It was a tragedy, and it did happen. But we see this quite a lot. When we get down to the bottom of issues that we face in organizations, generally, it's really around either people taking a position, insecurities about what's going on, particularly in a transformation type role or transformation type environment. The resistance that you face is largely because of people's insecurities around what that change might mean for them, how they're engaged in that change process, the time that's allotted to them in the engagement. And I think for me, I've always approached every issue from a perspective of humility. I like to think that actually I don't really understand what's going on. If someone's resisting something, or there's a general resistance to something, or people are putting up barriers or presenting problems, to try and understand what the underlying root cause of that is, because that's how we can end up resolving and fixing those issues. If we start, if we're just batting around looking at technical problems or trying to steamroller solutions through, people will just keep putting up more and more barriers and resistance to those changes that you're trying to make. And you have to bear in mind that in large organizations, there are myriad levels of complexity by which people who are familiar with the underlying technology, design, operating processes of an organization can befuddle you and prevent you from making progress. So you just need to get people on side, understand that you care about how they feel, and that if they present to you what their issues are, you'll try to find and work out a trade-off that gives them what they want while still continuing with the overall strategy. And that's an important part of managing and implementing change across the organization. Certainly, if we look at the News Corp example, but in organizations I've worked in the past, the moment you start trying to bring things together, people feel that there's going to be a loss of control.
Sure.
They get concerned about that. They start resisting it, and they'll come up with reasons why this can't be done and that can't be done. And I think you need to get ahead of that curve, build that relationship, and trust is an important part of that. So that folks know that actually your success is going to be built on them being part of that success, right? You can't do it without them. And people need to feel that. And it needs to be credible and believable and genuine, right? You can't pay lip service to these kinds of things. And I think that was one of the things that catapulted me in the whole News Corp exercise, was how we're going to bring people together when we've got in that organization. And I had the same thing at GlaxoSmithKline Wellcome. GlaxoSmithKline Wellcome was a series of loosely affiliated separate operating companies. And different companies have different degrees of power within the organization. So in pharmaceuticals, it's often research and development. In the case of News Corp, it's a media organization. It was the businesses that were generating the most profitable revenue. And it doesn't matter who they were, but and those folks get to call the tune at the end of the day. You need to win those folks and get them on board to get people to work together. So doing that is really about getting people to believe in you and recognize that you care about them and that your success, and that you recognize that your success is predicated on them being happy with the outcome that they're going to get. And I think that's as true for salespeople as it is for someone in my position. Because one of the things I used to say to, and I don't know if I ever said this to you, Peter, but one of the things I've said to salespeople is, we'll have this sales conversation, then I've got to go back, and we'll take the News Corp example. I've got to go back and I've got to sell that 15 times now to each of our businesses to get them on board, right? And these are the things that they're going to come back with in terms of challenges. So yes, when you said you learned a lot about sales from me, I'm very thankful for you saying that. A lot of what I was doing was putting together actually what that deal shape looks like from a sales perspective, and going back to sales folks and saying, this is what I need. Where can you land this deal? Mindful of the things that behind the scenes in your organization, because this is kind of how it needs to look, right? These are the challenges. These are the things we need to fix. And I think too many organizations, customer organizations, focus on price, right? And, as Chris Voss will say, price breaks deals, price doesn't make deals. And that's very true. And the moment you start focusing solely on price, you limit what a vendor organization can offer you, because it isn't just about the unit price of products. For example, a lot of the deals that I've done for organizations have been not just about what is the lowest price that we can achieve for a headline statement. It's about how much flexibility can we engineer into that deal structure, so we're not wasting money. How quickly can we launch or transition to new products and services? Because at the end of the day, For most organizations with a strategic impetus to do something, the value is executing that strategic impetus. That objective is what drives the value in their organization, not the unit cost for the line item for a single product that underpins it. It's part of it, right? It's part of that whole TCO perspective, but it's not the primary driver for doing something. Nobody sits down and goes, I'm not going to launch Facebook because I can't get the right pricing strategy on the platforms. It doesn't happen like that.
Yeah,
right?
you're right.
It's an important part, but it's not the sole part. So for me, a lot of where we work with vendors like you, is not only what price can we land it to make it work, but also how can you enable us to deliver it effectively, deliver it from a best practice implementation perspective. How can you help us most quickly launch those products and get people onboarded to them, are all part of that value proposition. And these are all areas where you as a vendor organization can add real value, because you've got deep insights into your product, you understand how they work. You can understand what we're trying to do with them, because that's the use case which your product's there to fulfill, provided you're being honest and telling the truth about it. And organizations can really benefit from that, although they often are quite blinkered. We don't need any support. We don't need any help. We know what we're doing. And you're going to face that as a salesperson, of course, selling into end user organizations. But overcoming that is a key part of opening up the conversation for pricing. And of course, as you start opening up the spectrum of what you can talk about, what you can look at, what you can achieve, more opportunities present themselves. And then you can find it by the time you get to the end of that process, that things have come up. You can add value in areas where the customer never even thought possible, that make a very big difference to the outcome and the success criteria of that organization implementing your product. So that's kind of how I see it.
I love that. Yeah, there's so many golden nuggets in there. And I think there were moments where, as you were talking, I'm like, okay, I remember at Dropbox giving you certain pieces of information to help on your side. And we can go into that in a little bit. But also on your side, we had this spreadsheet with the 15 business units, and price was part of it. Usage was part of it, right? I don't know if you remember. We collaborated on it. You kicked it off, which is awesome. But every sell item had a story behind it. And that was very apparent to me. I mean, you were doing a lot of the blocking and tackling with, hey, this is what this group CIO thinks. And I trusted you, right? Because I could tell it wasn't just one conversation you had with these people. You were actually having a lot of conversations internally to champion us. So that was amazing to see. By the way, like with all of this, was there any sort of training like early in your career that helped you with this? Or do you think this is something that was just in your disposition? And like, how did that play out for you, like in terms of training? Because salespeople get a ton of training. And, I have my thoughts on that, but I'm curious, like if you've had experiences there where you're like, oh, it was helpful or not really.
Yeah, you say it's interesting. So I spent a lot of time doing research. I mean, I like to learn about techniques. So I haven't done training in the traditional credentialization type perspective. Right? So I go off and do a diploma or something. But I just spend a lot of time reading books of successful people, successful change agents. Understanding psychology is an important part of seeing things through the lens of the recipient of the information that you're presenting, right? So you need to try and understand things from the other side's perspective, and that's important. It's important for a number of reasons, but an important one of those reasons is trust. If people see you're trying to understand their perspective, then they're going to be far more open with you, far more receptive to what you say, and more willing to try and give you the benefit of the doubt to get things over the line in a way that they're not if you're going to take a position that you know what's best and this is what we're going to be doing going forward. So I spent a lot of time understanding and reading books over the years around how to affect change, what is an effective management strategy, what's an effective execution strategy. But also there's an awful lot of experience. I mean, I learned, certainly in professional services, delivering projects, programs, you learn an awful lot about stakeholders and stakeholder management. And one of the things I've always told people in my teams is you be measured more by how you do things than what you actually do. And I think this is something that people often forget, right? And the example I'll give, and this was something I came up in at IBM when we're doing a large-scale bond implementation system, was to explain to the folks on the team that you've got to engage with the recipients of what we're delivering, and you've got to do it on an interpersonal level. Because at the end of the day, whether this implementation goes well or whether there are issues with it, and it's a complex platform that we're launching to a regulatory deadline, so there will ultimately be things that don't go right. People are going to measure us based on how we dealt with things more than what we dealt with. And the analogy that I give at a very simple level is you walk into a shop and you ask someone for, I don't know, a pair of shoes, right? And you can see the shoes are there. They say they're the shoes, and then they walk off, right? And you're left standing there thinking, well, I've got some questions about that. And you don't get answers to those questions. And then in the end, you think, you know what? I've had enough of this. I'm going to walk out this store. So what's happened there is they could fulfill your need, right? But they're just the way they went about it just didn't work for you, and you left. You didn't buy anything, right? You go to another store, you ask for whatever it is, the brand of shoes that you want. They don't have them. They ring around all the other stores for you, say, we don't have them here, we don't have them there, but we've gone around, we've got them at this store, wherever it is, and we can bring those in. We can have them for you here tomorrow. How's that for you? Do you know what? Actually, that works for me. Thank you very much. I'm going to do that. They didn't have what you wanted. They couldn't actually fulfill the fundamental objective that you went in for. But the way they went about it meant that you were prepared to give them the benefit of that, and you're going to get to that result in the end. And I think that there's a lot around how people, if I look at the challenges that we've faced with both supplier organizations, but also internally with stakeholders, is people respond most emotively to how they've been dealt with. A missed email, an ignored comment, that's perceived as a slight or an error. And salespeople do this, right? Customer might write out to a salesperson or leave a call. They don't get back to them in a timely fashion. Maybe they forget, maybe they're busy on something else, or they ignore them for whatever reason. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. Like they decided they're talking to somebody else and they're not going to engage that particular stakeholder. And these are bad decisions to make in terms of engagement, because you only need one or two people to be naysaying a product or a program or an implementation or a sale, whatever it is that's going on, to create quite a lot of negative feedback within an organization. Yes. And I think one of the things which I think you could apply loosely to this particular paradigm is, people, and I might be getting this slightly wrong, but people perceive a loss as at least twice as bad as a win. Right? So if you lose £10, you feel you've lost 20. If I give you £10, you don't see it as a net outcome. You're still balking at the fact that you lost a tenner. And I think the same is true when people feel they've not been properly engaged in a sales process. Right? It's very difficult to recover from that, and the damage that does generally within your relationship is often difficult to recover from. And I've seen that with sales organizations that have missed out stakeholders from a particular group. Suddenly you're on the back foot, even if your primary customer is good to go. And one of the things I did want to talk about for this conversation was sort of the need for engaging cross-functional groups in larger organizations. We can probably come on to that, but I've probably said enough now. And I say
no, that's super helpful, because something that I tell my founders and my clients is you need to engage the detractors as much as you engage the proponents, because basically, to your point, they sometimes don't come out of the woodwork until the end of the deal cycle, right? When there's a sliver of doubt. And so it's very, very important to address and diffuse those people early, and to ask like, hey, like, I know you like us, but who needs more convincing? So I love that you brought that up. One thing I wanted to talk about is just a specific deal situation we had, and I want to recount it and see if you remember it.
Ooh, okay.
And so I won't talk about the numbers, because to your point, it's how you dealt with it, not what price you got to. But in the late stages, let's say call this like 2 or 3 months before we formalize a contract at Dropbox with News Corp, our main competitor had come in and started, actually, I think this was your words. You said they were like carpet bombing the executives with emails on a very, very low price. This must have been like an 1/8 to 1/10 of the price that we had gotten to. And you had done such a good job that it was the lowest price on the enterprise side we were at that point. But this competitor, who was more enterprise ready, was marketing the enterprise features, and was really trying to, degrade our credibility in the market, came in with a very, very low ball offer. And so I remember this because one of the things that I prided is that I always wanted to get back to you as soon as possible. It didn't matter if I was in New York or California. I would check to see if Chris emailed me, every single morning. And that was the first thing I did when I woke up. you
Oh,
know,
wow.
even before I would get ready for whatever. And so I remember that morning where you had called me and you had mentioned this was happening. And um, you had asked me, is there anything I can do? Right. And at that point, I had thought about, okay, all the hours you and I had spent together. I was pretty sure that the other rep wasn't putting in the hours I was. We had also talked about the Dropbox usage compared to the other platforms usage around, hard data, that this is actually what's happening with the adoption. And we also had put together a series of decks where it's quotes from business units to help you sell the qualitative story as well. And all the other folks like Dominic Shine, Paul Timmons, Paul Cheeseborough. There was a
Yeah.
lot of stakeholders, and so I asked you if we could just hold firm, and I told you like there was likely nothing I could do there, because I did truly feel that if we were to go down, the competitor would do another round of it, right? Because it felt like a desperation Hail Mary to me. And you were so great in that situation where you pulled through for me. We stayed at the price point we had agreed at, even with this pressure of this competitor. And that's just a very specific instance that made a huge impact on me, because what you said in the beginning, it's not just about the price, right? It's about the trust and the engagement. So I'm curious if you remember that, because I've never brought it up in this detail with you, but
Right.
it's
Yeah.
that instance is seared in my memory, um, because I held firm, but not because I was saying, Chris, take it or leave it. It was more based off of the relationship we built, and you actually pulled through.
Yeah. So we had, although it was in some respects a relatively uncomplicated transaction, it was made complicated by the fact that there were a lot of different participants.
Yes.
And also the platform at the time offered a free version.
Yes, that's
which
right.
for a lot of use cases was entirely adequate, which was the
Yes.
other challenge, right? But we wanted to get everybody on the same footing. I think there was integration and various workflows that needed to be engineered within that as well. So we really wanted to get everyone on a standard footing on product-wise across the organization. I do remember that. You've got me a little bit on the hop here, because I thought you moved on the price a bit. I thought you had. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But the bigger part of it was.
Well, we moved. The thing is, we moved probably like 5 times before that.
Yeah, I mean, it was. When we look at that deal, it was. We talk about it's not just about price. And to be fair, that deal was quite a lot about price. To be fair, but equally, you were a great partner in terms of holding us through the deployment and the engagement with our business units. You were engaged with all the different business units as well, and the alternative provider, who was arguably the market leader and definitely at that point in time would have expected to be the preferred choice. Our sense on it internally was that you had willingly moved on how we were going to structure this deal to win it.
Yes.
Whereas what was happening with the competitor was, having sought to call our bluff on it, came in late at the day, as you said, looking for a sort of Hail Mary pass to come out down on price, but weren't, I would say, emotionally behind that deal that they were proposing, right? It was really a last-ditch attempt to keep you out of the equation.
Yes.
And the concern, I think, that we had internally was, they've done that to displace you. And once they've done that, what's going to happen going forward? Because the other thing that we had, of course, was it wasn't just about price. It was also the whole way we structured the contract. Because all through this process, we've been going through all the data privacy stuff, how we were going to structure the contract, how we were going to price that on a global basis. Because none of those conversations were had with the other party, because they hadn't entertained them up until that point. So we had got to a good place with you, not just in terms of unit price, but in terms of flexibility under the agreement. I think we had a true down option as well in that agreement, because that covered our back in terms of, because one of the challenges that we had at the time was organizations, and this is a common problem, by the way, with organizations that work with third parties, is what happens if you, in a downturn scenario, right? You've got less people, right?
Yep.
Or you divested a business entity. You're then stuck with product or services or a volume of services that you don't need anymore. You never had that problem when it was your own stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, if it's CapEx, you write it off. If it's people, they've gone anyway, and that's fine. But with contracts, you're sort of stuck with it. So we had a mechanism with you where we could true down a little bit within reason. I mean, it wasn't, we didn't go mad. We had to be sensible too. But we structured the deal with a degree of flexibility that got the businesses comfortable because nobody was quite sure how much they needed. We got you comfortable because we got to a TCV that was acceptable.
Yes.
So a risk profile that was acceptable. To then start going back to another third party who felt they were the dominant player in this conversation, and then open all of this. Well, we've got this with Dropbox. We've got this with Dropbox. We've got this. Nobody really wanted to go there. And also the value of getting you engaged was, I come back to the original point. This was a strategic impetus to do this, right? We wanted to make this happen. It was part of, I think it was one of the first deals across group that we've done as part of standardizing, homogenizing technology and improving efficiency across the organizations. Nobody really wanted to go back and say, okay, we're going to start that process again with another party. Now they've come to the table because they ignored us right the way through. I mean, they were engaged. So we went out to them, obviously we did, right? They weren't interested. They just weren't interested at all. So then we had to go through the whole legal process with those folks. And that was going to introduce delays on that strategic objectives. And at the time, the group CTO was Paul Cheeseborough. There's no way he was going to want to see that happen. And here's the point, right? What are we actually going to save, even if they came in lower, right? Even if they did, right, on price.
Right.
What are we actually going to save? With the delays that go in, with the amount of attorneys that we had involved, I mean, we had at least, certainly with all the privacy stuff that was going on at the time, Privacy Shield and all the rest of it, we had at least 2 internal attorneys. We had a privacy attorney. We had a panel attorney involved with it. I had all the procurement folks across each of the divisional businesses involved in it. There were different regulatory considerations in countries, so there was engagement with lawyers in those countries from a privacy perspective, how we're going to deal with some of this stuff. Then we had information security across it as well. We're going to open all of that up again. To go, it's not worth it for $5 a seat, right, or whatever it was.
Totally.
Right? It's just not worth it. So, and you were the best partner, right? Everything that we came to you with, you said you're going to go away and see if you can fix it, right? And you did. You went away and you came back and you fixed it. And I think we ended up doing an additional deal. And I don't know whether you guys were part of that. Some of the workflow transfer stuff was it Tervella, I think, at the time? I can't remember. But yeah, and that all went, and it was tough, but it went well, right? And, a large part of why that went well was because of the way you helped us structure that deal in terms of meeting our business case objectives from a TCO point of view. Because that's the thing that your competitor wasn't particularly interested in, was what's the whole piece look like? For them, it was about a license cost. But our deal had more moving parts than that. And I don't think they appreciated that. So I think we recognized internally that it probably wasn't going to go anywhere with them. But I had to mention it, right?
Yeah, I know. I really appreciate you saying that, because you're right. Negotiation is never like a single moment. It's a series of things that you do across months. And I think that's what gave me the confidence to really say, okay, Chris has done so much. I've done so much. We've both been pouring hours into it. And the detail that you just went through, I don't think I fully appreciated, but there's just so much complexity, right? Just getting everybody aligned. And so ultimately, that's what got the deal done, not that single moment, right? So I think there's a big lesson in that. So I really appreciate you. Yeah.
We were also, what I'll always advocate internally is this a partner that we can work with, right? Because buying the product is just a point in time. We've then got to live with that product, right? And as we go through and our understanding evolves with that product set, things are going to come out of the woodwork that we need to duck and dive. We navigate our way through. If we don't have a partner who is amenable to managing that and working with us on that, then actually price is almost an irrelevance, right? Because we get to a point where we've got a great price, but we can't deploy it, or there's a use case that wasn't considered when something. And I want to at the end of the day, when you're dealing with basically a global transaction across 15 or so different business units in that particular use case, not absolutely everything's going to get considered. That's just a factor. I'm not saying anything that anybody who's rational would deny. We need a partner that's going to work with us to resolve those issues, right? And you were that partner, right?
Yeah,
so other folks can
appreciate
come
that.
in, and they can be cheaper. But at the end of the day, if you don't feel that organization's going to work with you, has the same joint motivations to make that platform work, and you were well motivated. I mean, you were basically the outsider in that transaction. The normal go-to organization was the alternative bid. I think there might be one other, but I can't remember now.
Yeah.
So you were absolutely motivated to make everything work and pull every stop out. And we knew, Paul knew, the other CTOs knew that we could expect the extra mile from you guys over anybody else, and that's a very important part of this deal cycle. They say standard procurement handbooks is never pick the cheapest, never pick the most expensive. So you want to go through the bell curve and you want to pick the median kind of thing, and that's partly, there's some truth in that sort of broad brush approach, right? And you were, I think, at the end of the day, if we're going to talk about price, to be fair, I think you were still on the money. I don't think they came in, I can't remember exactly where it landed, but I think you were still in on the money. And overall, if we look at it from a TCO point of view, you were the cheapest outcome because of the various flexibility. Because we had this, of course, we did have some divestitures that took place, so we did end up invoking some of those
Totally. Yeah, and
and that
the
made a big
option was
difference,
there,
right?
right? Yeah.
Because there's nothing, I'll come back to that point that people measure a loss twice as bad as a gain, right? One of the things that, when I first came into, we'll stay with News Corp as now, but when I first came into News Corp, people would come to me and say, we've got a divestiture, but we've got this unexpired license, product obligation, I don't know, whatever it is, $1 million, whatever it is, right? And those really go down like a cup of cold sick in organizations, right? We're stuck with this now. What can you do? And that's actually how I ended up picking up all of this commercial role for News Corp, was
to kind of clean that up. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter who it is, but when I came in, after dealing with the Newsroom 360 stuff, one of the things that came up was there was an issue with a major vendor who had $1 million worth of unexpired cloud platform licensing with a year left to run, and there'd been a change of internal strategy in the organization, so didn't want to use that anymore. You can't cancel a revenue-based service because you can't rev rec it, right? So from the vendor's point of view, we can't do anything with it. There's nothing we can do with that. So what we did, and there's a slight tangent, but I think it's important. You need to work. That vendor wouldn't budge on that obligation, right? So what I did was I went around with our various project sponsors in the group, said, right, who's buying from this vendor across group, right? Where else are we doing deals, right? And I closed those deals down. We agreed to close those deals down. We're going to stop them. I think it was also for them, it was either half year or end of first quarter. I can't actually remember, but it was a fairly important quarter close for them. And we shut down all the other orders. We said, okay, this is what we're going to do, right? And I roadmap a cash flow out for them and said, right, we're going to net off the $1 million. We're going to stick another $2 million on the table. You're going to be net up at $2 million on the deal. I think we put another $3 million, and there was one that said about net up $2 million on that deal. They said no, and then I think it was UK time, because I was running out of UK. We were at about 8 p.m. UK time. I was running out a window to get it signed off. They rang me and said, it's too late. How are we going to do this? It was in a blind panic. I said, we can still do it. I'm lined up. We've got CFO ready to sign it. I've got the CTO. We're all agreed. You cancel that. We order that. We put them all on the same paper. So the net transaction still comes out at $2 million. And we're done. And at the last minute, they said, okay, we'll do it. But for months up to that point, they were adamant they weren't going to do it. And that's the sort of thing that really
puts a sour taste in your mouth. Even though the deal got done, you probably don't trust that relationship.
No, it doesn't help, right? And of course, the problem with things like that is, you can say $1 million is not that much, right? But it's not an insignificant amount of money. But I come back to my point: people spending $1 million for something they want is less important than spending $1 million for something they no longer want, right? So no longer want something. It's it might as well be $2 or $3 million, right? It's very, very painful for people. So it did leave a very bad taste in everyone's mouth. But going forward with that organization, we built that. We took that as a precedent, and we built across our global organization and our global contract relationship with them the ability to substitute product across our not just our businesses, but also across product lines within reason. Obviously, because different product lines have different commercial structures that underpin them, but within reason.
Sure.
And that saved millions of dollars in the organization because we were constantly buying stuff over here when we had stuff over here that was underutilized, for example. Some of it
That
was the
makes
same
sense.
product, some of it was not the same product, right? And that
Yeah.
was that was a huge waste of money for us. I think we're wasting about $1 million a year of businesses buying stuff whilst we had stuff. I mean, you couldn't move it around, right? So we changed all of that, and they got on board with that. It took a while, but they got on board with that, and that builds a lot more trust with that organization. And one of the things I was going to say, because I made a note to talk about this, is for sales organizations that want to transition from a tactical sales model where they're dealing with individual businesses at a local level or individual countries at a local level to an enterprise relationship, which turns it from a tactical set of agreements to a single strategic one. And a lot of sales folks are quite reluctant to make that leap. And actually, I was talking at a sales convention for a large CRM company a while ago, where we had this conversation. One of the things that came up is, well, why would we do that if we're making more money selling individually to components, to operating companies or countries in an organization, than bringing that all together in terms of the value proposition that you're proposing, Chris? And the point that I would make is, you're trading. No one's going to write down a contract. So don't let me go. So any salespeople watching this, no one's coming to you and saying, I want you to take a write down of a contract. It does happen, by the way, and we've made that happen, but nobody goes into that with that expectation, right? But what you do, you end up with, arguably, say, let's just keep it simple, the same contract value, so the same TCV. But what changes is organization isn't wasting money across the group, right? So you transition from being a set of tactical relationships, any one of which could drop off, to a single global strategic relationship, where actually making a change to that agreement is quite a big ask because it's become the strategy. So it has to go up much higher levels in the organizations to get cash. Businesses can't really drop out of it in the same way they can. If you've got, 10 contracts for $1 million, someone just doesn't renew $1 million contract. You've got one contract at $10 million a year, much harder for people to drop that. Well, where are we going? We're going to cancel a $10 million contract. How does that work? Totally. That's our strategy. Yeah. We've invested a lot into it. And I think that's something that more softer perspective, if you like, the value perspective of that relationship is something that's often lost with sales folks operating on a unitary in-country basis. And I didn't want to make a mention of that because it's one of the biggest challenges we face.
Yeah, because the other thing too is like the resources are also aligned to those bigger strategic contracts, right? Like, of course, the vendor is going to put up the onboarding resources, but there's a lot of internal folks too who are aligned to making this product successful on a global level.
You get a much better profile for to showcase the product suite.
Exactly.
You get much more executive sponsorship. You make it more sticky. And I'm not here to, representing a customer organization, sticky products are tricky, right, at the end of the day. But the thing is, if you make it sticky and you get something in return for it, then that's a trade-off that makes sense, right? I mean, often people talk about, I want to be able to cancel my agreements. You can't get to a good place with a vendor on a revenue-based service, which they can't rev rec if you can just cancel it on a whim, right? You're not going to get to a good value, right? And you're not going to get commitment either. So in terms of transitioning and making that work, understanding thought leadership around how you can deploy that product from a best practice, but you're not going to get any of those value propositions if you're being extreme to make a point, rolling on a month-to-month basis, right? So you do make it sticky, but you get something in return for that. And what you get in return for that is an investment from the supplier organization to help you realize your strategic objectives. And that's invaluable, right? Because the real value of these products is what they bring to the business from a strategic perspective, not what the line item is on a contract.
And the other calculation for us at Dropbox was you all were very open to allowing us to publicly say News Corp was now a customer of Dropbox, which is also invaluable, right? And you don't do that if there's a bunch of small regional contracts, right? You do that if you have the full weight of the C-suite behind the product. So that was extremely valuable for us, where we were willing to budge a little bit to get to a price point we had never gotten to with other companies, because we also saw the other side of the partnership, which is not just pricing, but also the investment and the logo and all that. So, Chris, I am sorry. I wish we could continue this. I'm a little bit late for a coaching call on brand, but this was amazing to have you on board, Chris. I'd love to do this again because I feel like there's so many things we didn't cover too. But you've taught me so much about sales, about how to collaborate internally with stakeholders, and just super appreciate everything you've done for me and for the organizations I worked at. And looking forward to continuing this discussion. But thanks for
I'd
taking your
love to do it
evening
again.
here.
Yeah, there's a whole load. Yeah, there's a whole load of collateral we can go through. I've got a whole list of stuff here that we could talk about. That's
Can't
going to help
wait.
you and help your customer. And the important thing is that it's a symbiotic relationship, and helping make that transition from a win-lose type mentality to that symbiotic. How can we both profit from this agreement? How can we make this work? And the ability to showcase and referenceability is part of that, right? Because you want to be able to do that. You want a customer that's going to sound their horn about the value of what you brought to their organization. And these are things that I think sometimes get lost by the wayside when people are trying to do deals. So we can talk about that. We didn't really get much into sort of that cross-organizational piece, which I wanted to talk about, but
Yeah.
we can cover that another time.
Let's do that. No, there was so much richness here already. So, Chris, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to
Thank you.
put Chris's LinkedIn profile in the notes so that folks can follow you and connect with you. And yeah, really appreciate, again, the time here, Chris.
You're welcome. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Love it. Amazing.